following interview with Kevin Doyle took place at the University of Newcastle on the 5th of March 2019. Kevin was the general manager of the store at Charlestown, New South Wales during the 1970s.
So when did you come to Newcastle?
1960, start of school, Belmont High School, moved to Belmont South, happy days. All of the things that people dream about. Near the lake, as a kid, it was adventure time. Me and my brothers were good swimmers. We attended the North London Boys Swimming Club, so we were competent swimmers. My dad immediately joined us in the surf club at Swansea Belmont, which is known as Blacksmiths, and we had a great time. So from the point of view of recreational time, fun, weather, perfect, that sort of thing. So they're immediate, flashy sort of memories, because again, London, which we lived in a really lovely part of London, we lived in Kensington. Father did have a very good job there, working for an American company in a social club. And my mother was working as well, so it was unusual to have both parents working in those days, but they were very industrious, looking forward to save money to basically come to Australia. So going back to the Belmont experience, my father couldn't find work then in his profession, and because he had trained as an electrical mechanic, he was offered a job at the BHP, and he worked there for 14 years, as did my Uncle John. And I guess I didn't really know where the BHP was, because living at Belmont, it's a long way into where the BHP is. And the buses, you can remember 6 a.m, a bus pulling up outside your home, and men from that area congregating and getting onto the bus, and the same thing in the afternoon when it would return and drop people off. There was a railway at Belmont, and that railway went into town. My cousins lived right next to the railway, in Railway Parade, and most of those cousins went to local schools. I went to Belmont High School. On a high school side of it, my mother was against too many Doyles at say, the Morris Brothers, because we had 10 cousins. And it wasn't, in her opinion, a good thing for the mental health of the school teachers, or even ourselves, because we played with each other, as in sport and recreation and so forth, and they were very good at sport.
Aren't they like, you're talking about going to Newcastle Boys High, and it's sort of like the roots
it is without a doubt. Like I can tell you that academically, Belmont High School, it was on paper was every bit as good, and the best students at Belmont High School were the girls, by far.
Yeah.
Oh, they'd run rings over the boys, and I was lucky enough to get into A classes when I first came, and then because of choices I made, I got into B classes because I dropped the languages, Anyway, but the girls, and some of them are formidable women who've done well, but had they have been acceptable into industry, would have blitzed it. Whereas I think there's a bit of a name, it's a poshy sort of thing. Newcastle Boys High was a selective school that you didn't have to have money to get in there, but you had to have reasonably good academic qualifications to get chosen to get in. And I tell the story. Is that on?
It is, but we can edit anything out.
I tell the story. My mother did a deal. The three of us went to Boys High. So I had my brother Damien, who's now deceased, and Frank, and she said, and I've also got a dumb guy, and me. She said, if you take the dumb guy, you get the other two
The
for
package
free.
deal.
Got a package deal. Now that's a story.
That's a story. That's all. That's good.
idea then from moving from Belmont was the parents were offered a new house at Waratah West, which is not far from the university, as you know, and they were there, lived there till they both died, and they were there for 46 years. On the other hand, Jesmond Centre was opening, and one of the school teachers at Newcastle Boys High, he was the headmaster, as a matter of fact, F.H. Beard, was recruiting people who missed out on scholarships to go to university in the retail industry, and he was a visionary. He saw the opportunity for people who probably had aptitude and were driven, and he recognised that in me. I went for an interview when I was finished the leaving certificate, and I started with Woolworths in July 1965. I'd already finished the leaving certificate stage 1, and the last year of the leaving certificate was 1965. So having got sufficient pass to join Woolworths in their commercial training, they were opening shopping centres, and they were doing them very, very quickly. So they gave you like an apprenticeship, and that apprenticeship meant that you'd either be a shop assistant or you went into management. I went into management. I opened lots of shopping centres, models. They follow a formula, and they're very rigid. They write their own academic book on management. They do not like you to get too involved in the accounting side of the business, because they have a system for that, and you learn to read managerial reports that are actually operational by 10 o'clock every day. It gives you a picture of how your own store is running, comparative value to other stores, and this is all grist for the mill for the later career I had with the co-op store. So Woolworths are disciplinarians. Systemisation is their big thing, and making lots of sales and making a small profit at the end of it, but multiplied by thousands and thousands. The shopping centre industry grew and grew and grew in Australia, and as you probably may be aware, Jesmond Centre was one of the first proper shopping centres that was opened in New South Wales. It was followed very quickly by a number of others, and I got caught up in that side of the business. You could have gone into the academic part of the Woolworths organisation out of head office in Park Street, Sydney, and having spent a couple of weeks carrying a folder and pressing buttons on lifts, one of the trading guys said to me, "What do you like? Do you like the trading floor or behind the scenes?" And I said, "Out on the trading floor. That's, I love the cut and thrust of the business." You get known as being capable at trading. Trading is simply buying and selling, and keeping the stock on the shelves and making sure staff are efficient, that you've got sufficient staff when the shops are busy, you've got sufficient goods on show so that the folk that are coming in. Newcastle and its region has a difference to, say, Sydney. Because we were an industrial city, lots of people got paid fortnightly. So the significance both at all of the retail outlets, including the co-op store, is there would be an on week and an off week. When men got paid, there was a significant uplift in people shopping. It was common, even in my family, for my mother to be waiting for my father's pay, because there wasn't really any credit facilities, for the cash to be in the paycheck and going to shop. And if you went to shop, say at Jesmond, well, if you look down the bank of 15 cash registers that were operated manually, and things had to be keyed in manually, and items had to be price marked and so forth. All of those things took time. Today we've got electronic self-serve checkouts and so forth, which allow people to do their transaction much quicker, and credit cards and tap and So if you look at the progression, I was away a lot from Newcastle, missing my family, and I'm talking about my brothers and sisters and cousins and so forth. And my wife was homesick. We were living in Orange at the time. Had opened the largest regional shopping store that was in Orange, and we had a decision to make whether to set up shop, live in Orange permanently, or move. And my wife was pregnant with our third girl, and she wasn't well, so she needed help. We didn't have help. So I put in an application for transfer, and I transferred back to Newcastle. I was only back a few months, and I was contacted by the, we'll call him the headhunter for the co-op store. The co-op store's appointment was a board appointment. I attended an interview, and the board was president. It was in the old head office in Hunter Street, which is now, as we know, no longer. And I was contacted to say that my application had been accepted. They offered me a permanent position. Sometimes you would be offered a 3 months trial. I couldn't afford to do that because I had a family. I was leaving my first employer, never worked anywhere else, and it was a big decision for me to do that. So,
Kevin, can I just ask, what period of time did you work for Woolworths, and when did you start at the store?
okay. I actually had 2 years for Woolworths as a Saturday morning casual, and that was from 1963 to 65. I started my permanent role, as I said, in July 67, and by 1975, I accepted the role at the co-op. So I had about 2.5 years, as I recall, from at the co-op, and 18 months was at their largest and more upgraded store. It was actually built in 1970. I think the records show it was opened in 1970. So I went in there at, say, 75. I was there 18 months, and I got co-opted, if you like, to come in and study the possibility of being the replacement CEO. The CEO that had accepted the role, Bill McGrath, had been diagnosed with a very serious illness, and they were preparing to replace him with somebody, and an insider was better than getting an outsider. And I didn't really have all that much experience as a cooperative person, but they wanted someone who was a trader, who could understand the buying and selling side of it, keeping stock on show and staff and all of that. They had lots of people who were very capable at administration, quite capable at administration. They had very few people who could run the trading division in a modern way. So that was the decision for us to A, come back to Newcastle, B, an opportunity came up, and I accepted the position, moving into the head office responsible. But having done the budgets at the co-op store and looking into the future, there was a huge job. And when you looked at the people in the management team, they were very elderly. My next person down the line from me was probably 10 years older than myself. And I felt that probably I may not have had the personal skills to drive an organisation from where it was, and it was sort of stuck. But to get it into the next phase needed a lot of capital. The cooperative didn't borrow capital. It funded everything because of its responsibility to its members. And as I understand the financial situation at the time I was there, they really had no real debt or overhead other than having to purchase stock. So the things that I saw was that they always had plenty of stock. They had a huge connection with its own warehousing. The warehousing would have had to be as big as anything that I'd seen at Woolworths. It was called CWS Wholesalers, Clyde Street in Islington, or that general area. And it's a massive area. So they had the bakery, which again, I think you've got an interview with Les Gibbs that says that the bakery in its day was probably the largest in the southern hemisphere at a time. Going from that type of situation to looking at its, say, budgetary constraints, it did need financing. Now, it needed the orchestration of its sales and profitability had to be there to be able to fund its purchases. The dilemma that I recognised and came to be is if you close off inefficient branches, you also close off some of your customers, because if you look at a warehouse is a giant thing that's really just an empty shell until you put stock in it. Well, who are the customers? Well, the customers were the 13 branches. The stock that's on show is a purchase order, and then you have to depend on the loyalty of the customers coming into those branches. As I saw it, other than Charlestown and Newcastle, they seem to have a wider appeal to the public. They were big, very good on service, home delivery of groceries. Even you could ring them up and place an order, and the order would be delivered, similar to what Coles Online and Woolworths Online are doing today. And you didn't have to pay at the door. They had a credit system. You might remember that Mr. Gibbs said that they brought out a credit card, and they did. They had a credit card system that would go onto your account, and your account would be posted to you at your home address to pay the account within, say, a fortnight. So they gave you a fortnight's grace. You could get a bottle of milk or a loaf of bread delivered to, usually some of the houses were designed that the bread and milk could come in through a little passageway and be left in there, so that they wouldn't spoil. So what I'm talking about is old-fashioned thinking. However, it's become new age thinking. So the co-op in many ways were well ahead of its time. They offered travel. They had one of the largest and most successful health funds, medical benefit funds. The closure of the co-op's medical benefit fund meant that NIB inherited its people as well as the business and all of the customer base. NIB wouldn't be what it became unless the transfer was done. The store travel was the same. They were like agencies, and they were not sold, they were just given away during the closure period. So you're looking at then what other things do they do? Well, they had service stations. Nearly every store in every suburb had a service station. Charlestown, the service station's still there. It's on Charlestown Road on the right-hand side as you go from the old building. And we had two mechanics in there. Denison Street had a service station, a very large service station, and it serviced not only the co-op stores, cars and trucks and so forth, but it was also available to the public. So it comes to pass that I actually get in the chair to run the business at Charlestown, and then I have to get a mindset. I've got a Woolworths mindset of how to run a store, and I realise that I'm in a department store with a supermarket, with another division which is across a quadrangle, which was an entertainment area that Co-op owned and used for the public. And it was a full, you could say, a Harvey Norman store. Electrical, TVs, carpet, white goods and so forth. And that was all part of my charter to run that. So on the books, I think we had about 300 plus staff. That means casuals and so forth. All of those people didn't work in the store at the same time, same as the university. You have a passing parade of people depending on the hours we're open, and a lot of casual staff and a lot of young people. We employed a hell of a lot of school students to give them an opportunity to start, and also a source of education and training, and to glean people for staffing in the future. And then it dawned on me that I really didn't know much about what the cooperative really was. I had really no knowledge other than reading up on it before I applied for the job. And then I realised that my parents had instilled in their sons values, which are to do with community. The co-op was very community based. It had a loyalty that I'd never seen. The people shopping in the store had a loyalty thing, but the demographic, if you looked at the demographics, and I had plenty of opportunity to do that, because you just saw it coming at you week by week. It was really an older demographic. The younger folk were already shopping in the time that I'm talking about at Jesmond Centre. Katara was the next biggest shopping centre in Newcastle. There was no Charlestown. The biggest and most significant business in Charlestown was the cooperative store, sitting on the top of the hill. The next most significant shop was a Woolworths variety store, and then across the back of that there was a small Coles supermarket, and then beyond that there was land, and it was that's where Civil and Civic ended up building the shopping centre that we know now.
So can you describe where the store was exactly at Charlestown?
Yep. Go to the top of the hill. It's now known as Hilltop Plaza, Charlestown. So it's on Charlestown Road, and it traverses to the Pacific Highway. They owned all of that land, and the only thing they gave up for some reason or other was the immediate corner. Whoever it was that actually sold the land to them wanted to keep the corner as a significant point, because they themselves would benefit from the fact that the co-op store was triangular in shape, and it went into the side street, which if you're going into the big shopping centre, you turn in there where the roundabout is, and you go down to the big shopping centre, but on the left-hand side there's an entry to a two-phase car park, which sits above the retail area. Below the retail area is a very large warehousing for the storage of stock and goods. That's where perishables were kept to send up to the supermarket. So the co-op store building was a new building designed on the lines of a department store, more so than a supermarket. It was large. It's still a significant building. It's still probably the most prominent position, and I think just down from there there's a high-rise. Had the high-rise not been built, you could actually see Lake Macquarie. I often used to go up because you look at the car parking spaces and see people were abusing the space. That was a problem, because there was free parking, and the parking area itself was convenient to allow people to come and go and park. The first level was completely undercover, so it afforded people an opportunity to shop. You could take your shopping trolley into the very large, there's 2 lifts, so it's good sized lifts to be able to take shopping trolleys and go up. And when you actually look at that, look at a modern shopping centre, it was built along the designs of a modern shopping centre, and that's why it hasn't been knocked down. It's still a relatively young building, having been opened only in 1970.
So you mentioned like the demographic, and it's interesting what you say. You just observed that it continued, like it was an older demographic. Do you think its traditions as you know, being for working class, do you think it was just that generation that grew up
I think
with
what it was when I started to carefully question the management about what its hopes and aspirations and for its trading and so forth. They're saying, well, you know the answer to that because you're a young guy and you've been working with one of our major competitors, and you can see what's coming and going every week. I think if you looked at probably when I first arrived in Newcastle, say 1960, and there was only the start of shopping centres, the cooperative store and its branches would have been trading very, very well because there was nowhere else to shop, in the sense of where do you buy from a hammer through to a bottle of tomato sauce, and it was always said go to the co-op. So the demographic then was everybody. There wouldn't be a school child in Newcastle or the Hunter Valley, or particularly the coalfields areas, that wouldn't have been outfitted with new shoes, uniform and so forth, and the cooperative, or whichever branch, would have provided that. Now the added incentive was that if you shopped for say 6 months, the dividend, which at the time was 10%, that is a loyalty on what you purchase, and the words come back to me again, Les Gibbs. It was a democratic society of people who no one person had control over the shareholding. Shareholding was maximised, and I think $99 per person. You're only required to have $1 in your share account, but if you had 99, so be it. But the value end of it for purchasing was when you actually made a purchase. If you had a store card, which was like a credit card, or a number in your head, that would be taken down and put into your store book, a little book. And the accounting system gave you what you purchased, and at the end of the 6 months, the dividend was paid out to you in purchasing more goods. So that was the loyalty. Now that covered the economics at home, mothers being expert at this. They in turn use that money mainly to buy things which were probably out of reach and not available in the weekly pay packet because credit facilities weren't necessarily there. So I am talking about 10, 15 years prior to the competitors coming along. So the distribution of your demographics then is quick and easy to jump into a shopping centre. How many shopping centres did the co-op have? They didn't. They had branches which were either on a street, strip shopping, did have car parking, but they were perceived to be a little bit more expensive than say Coles or Woolworths. And what Coles or Woolworths are good at and still good at is they loss leader items. They actually advertise goods at a reduced price, which they themselves don't actually reduce the price. They approach the supplier and they say to the supplier, there's a mathematics behind supply and pricing. We are currently buying 1 box from you. We will buy 100. We want a discount. Or in the case of the co-op store, they themselves could go to a supplier and say, we need to be able to pass that discount on. Now, they had the capability of doing that, but they didn't have the capability of how to market it. That's where their skills fell down. They had a lot of excellent people, good people. They had an advertising department that, from the point of view of revenue to the advertising dollar that went out to the likes of the Newcastle Morning Herald, NBN, etc., the budget that they had to spend in Newcastle was greater than Woolworths and Coles, because they spent it only in Newcastle and its surrounding areas. So the Newcastle Morning Herald, for example, its space given to the cooperative was equal to, if not better, until they started to fall off. Once they fell off, of course, their appeal was dying. So come back to the question, the noticeable difference. The noticeable difference to me was people of my mother's era were quite happy to shop at where they could get value for money. My mother would shop between the co-op store and Woolworths and some of the other outlets, and would probably, because she didn't drive, would utilise the fact that the co-op store in its day would deliver to your door. They'd not only deliver to your door, they'd actually put stuff in your fridge. That's how good the service was. Now that costs money. And in my day, I'm going in analysing where their costs are, delivering bread, where the discussion I had with the minister at the time, he asked me a question. He says, "You're a new boy, where do you see the weaknesses?" And I said, "Well, you've got a huge leakage of profit over at the bakery. We've got this massive bakery, we've got all these people delivering bread, and we're not making any money." And he says, "What are you suggesting?" And I said, "The possibility of looking at another way at it." He said, "If it's closure, it's not going to happen."
So when you mentioned the minister, which minister?
Minister Sid Einfeld. He was a wonderful guy. I think he came from the legal profession. He certainly was put into the position of Minister for Housing and Cooperatives because the cooperative movement not only meant, like the co-op store, it meant the Newcastle Permanent Building Society. It meant all the building societies throughout New South Wales that provided an opportunity for people to get into housing when possibly the banks were a little bit more difficult to deal with, and you had to show a different sort of mechanism to a bank to be able to get a housing loan from the bank, whereas a cooperative society used to do things like you'd run they call a Star Bogut Society, where there might be limited membership, and you all help each other by lottery, by taking a number, and where you were in that lottery depended on your housing loan, but your housing loan was at preferred interest rates, and you got your housing loan quickly if you were lucky enough to win the pill, the ticket. So a Minister for Housing and Cooperatives was instilled with this social justice thing. So he came from a mindset of social justice. He would have been a very elderly man when I met him, and he was such a gentleman. He was looking for ways forward. He was thinking positively about the movement, how it would survive in retailing. And I've often thought about it that if you had today the cooperative movement still there, and you had retailing online, which they had capability of doing, and warehousing like they had, and buying power like they had, it's just a timing issue. The demography could have been changed as far as the purchasing. Co-op store is an enigma. It's the enigma was that you don't see it while you're in there. There's problems that you don't have a solution to, and yet wait a little bit of time, and you don't have that time because life isn't like that, economics isn't like that. It makes a decision, and it had so many positives. And then when the crunch came, when they started, I'd left in December '77. I started my consulting business to start in January, and I was employed by my replacement to be a quiet observer. I actually supplied goods and services to the cooperative store, and for that, if you like, for that benefit, I was able to still have an opinion with the replacement. His name was Bruce Maxwell, and Bruce became the general manager of the whole cooperative, and he in turn had to deal with the decisions that, in the end, he was making decisions that nobody would have been right or wrong. The sales volume started to fall, the loyalties factor, and I think I read something about Errol Chant, the receiver, and he said if only the 80,000 members that were then still members spent about $230, I don't know whether it was a year or a month or a week more, it could save the store's doors from closing, meaning that they needed more loyalty. But the value proposition of am I getting value for money? And it was a perception then that the dividend had dropped to 2 cents in the dollar. We'll buy fuel. And when my gauge says I'm near empty, I need to buy fuel. And I might have loyalty to my local fuel depot, but if I'm running low on fuel, I'll have to pay whatever the next service station says. It's not like that in retailing. You get a choice, multiple choice of going to Coles, Woolies, the co-op store, whatever. And if you start a shopper with a routine that it's convenient to go to, say, Katara, it's very hard even to get them to drive, even though you might have the same shops up at Charlestown, unless you are got other reasons, you'll probably still shop at the same local shopping centre. The co-op store had that prominence in its day and in its time, and then yes, when these other stores opened, and then of course the pressing thing which you've asked the question about is the demographics. It sadly, on some of the investigations I did as to who our customer was, when you actually looked at somebody who was going out shopping by using the convenience of home shopping and home delivery, in many cases we had two people delivering what would account to be $30 or $40 worth of goods in one box with fruit and vegetables and all the rest of it, which was really, really nice. But we had a truck, a driver and a delivery man doing that job. Now even today, Coles Woolworths have one driver, one truck, and the pricing is key to a minimum spend and also a delivery charge. To get you on board, they may offer you free delivery, but there's a delivery charge. All the Woolworths stores that I know of back in that era, if you wanted home delivery, you paid as you went through the checkout. They gave you a tag, pinned it on your bags, and you paid for delivery. Home delivery and a home delivery person, obviously a contractor, delivered your goods. Or you had a pickup service, which was very popular. That is, you went to your car, drove into a little pickup point, and they'd load the stuff into your car. That is very costly for the store to provide a physical location, cost of the property, and the loss of space, if you like, and then obviously dealing with cars coming in and out. So that died. The co-op was incapable of seeing the future of what it was, what it had to be. There were some compounding other things that I read where people had lost money, and as we know, that's not true. But the co-op store, Charlestown and the city, on a Saturday morning would have a lot of people coming in with cash, because the attraction was deposit. It was a deposit taking organisation. organisation where you could put money into the credit union or put money into your account, and they would pay you a rate of return which was equivalent to about what the housing loan rate was. They were competing all the time with another cooperative called the Newcastle Permanent Cooperative and also the Greater Building Society. And on the Saturday morning Newcastle Morning Herald, on the bottom strip, there would be an ad to entice people to get out of bed, get the cash that they had people carried a tremendous amount of cash, particularly folk that might have retired or whatever, and or they might have taken money out the day before at the Building Society, anticipating the co-op store was going to pay another half of 1% per annum. Funny thing, and turn up with that money wrapped up in a newspaper, and I'm talking about a chunk of $10,000, and deposit that into their store account. Now, therein lies something that I haven't read in Chant's report. When the deposit would be made, the comp operator, which is basically the person who has the book that goes into a machine and allocates the $10,000 into your account, they give you a receipt that that's a deposit. So you've got that deposit there. It's been printed into the book. More often than not, it was into your shareholders book. Now the significance is a shareholder is not supposed to carry any more than $99 in their share account. So I asked the question, when the Minister, that is the Minister of Housing Cooperatives, decided that he needed to send in a receiver, is it somewhere in the archives that the real problem was they couldn't untangle the shareholders' accounts from the deposit accounts? Now it's very easy. All you just do is simply say, okay, there should only be $99 maximum in the shareholding account, and we'll just put the rest into another account. But that is a financial transaction that's like putting a deposit in a bank in the wrong account. And it's not as easy as if anyone's ever put money into the wrong account in a bank. You can't just get online, or you can't just walk in the door and unravel it. It's got to be verified you're the owner of the money. How did the money get in there in the first place? There's a whole audit system. Now, I believe that one of the contributing factors to the stores sending up a notification publicly they were in trouble was the way those two accounts operated, because that also put a buzz out there, and I was affected by it because I had money in both accounts. And we were told that the receiver had frozen the accounts. Now, once you get that message, federal governments can't stop the onslaught of people queuing up outside of banks or building societies. And there was a case at one time in New South Wales where Western Sydney branch of, might have been St George, when it was a building society, had a similar type of thing happen. There was a rumour in the community. It ended up the Premier had to go out. The government came up and said, we will absolutely guarantee that there's nothing wrong. But there was a run. And people might get this idea that there's a vault that's as big as this room and all the money's all stacked up in it. But that's not how it operates. That's not how the financial system operates. The money might be caught up in stock. They've got it in the warehouse that needs to be sold to be able to create the cash flow. And they did have a problem because, again, I knew the people who were running the place, the general manager and all of his offsiders, and they did have a cash flow shortage to be able to buy goods once that thing happened. Then it comes to pass when it's left into the hands of a receiver. Receivers are also called, from my background in finance, recovery agents. I have never ever seen a recovery agent recover much other than their fees and charges and costs, and that's me being a little bit facetious. Once they are called in, it's usually the death knell business, a matter of time. It is amazing to me that it took the years it took to sell up the co-op store when all of its assets were unencumbered. Yes, they had on paper that they owed money. It was to suppliers, and the suppliers had an option. If the goods were in the warehouse, they could have said, well, the goods are still ours, they haven't been paid for, and we want them back. But I don't recall that ever happening. I think the folk that had supplied the co-op with goods were quite happy to get a settlement. Even those people didn't get paid like we've seen the modern type of payouts where people are getting nothing or 2 cents or 5 cents in the dollar. As I understand from the reports I've read, all of the suppliers were paid because there were sufficient assets to be able to be sold and auctioned off. And by 1981, it was all settled. The co-op had 90,000 members at its heyday. It operated for nearly 90 years, 85, 89 years. It's a formidable task for something to last so long. When we've actually seen retail organisations come and go within 5 years. Online businesses collapse almost the day you place your order because they're underfunded. They haven't got sufficient cash. The wonderful story that Les Gibbs said in his interview was how simplistically it started in the UK. People with a common view on needing goods and clubbing together to buy essentials. So you go back to the early mining or the end of the industrial cycle. I guess folk could see that if they clubbed together, they would be able to buy at a better price. They would each get an opportunity to buy at a better price and be able to get regular delivery of their goods. And then if you go onto the financial side of it, which I spent the last 30 years in, building societies, friendly societies, funeral funds are all designed around the same thing in as much of having purchasing power, common interests, no one person profiteering on the other person's purchases. It's a loyalty thing. There's a social equality in a cooperative. And I think that's a sad thing, because if you actually took the model and put it over what we could have today, we probably wouldn't have some of the extraordinary billionaires that are out there that have made money out of all of us, that have profiteered out of being clever. What if it was actually a cooperative society that did that? And cooperative societies do get the benefit from the taxation. They essentially, talking about my time, they paid no tax. They were tax exempt, similar to churches and various other things like the friendly societies. The friendly societies went through a period where they were taxed, and there was tax relief given to investors that used friendly societies. And most of those were used for people to provide education and higher education for their kids. And again, in my own experience of the financial services industry, there are things like what's called bonds that are bought by parents and grandparents to be able to say, in 10 years' time, there's a bond, you cash it in, or partially cash it in to pay for education costs. So there's a lot of good in the cooperative movement, and I think one day somebody will sort of put it together, but it won't be me.
Kevin, that's such a great overview of like your sort of even though you're only there for a short amount of time, they obviously valued your experience at Woolworths, being a younger person. You were saying they were like older executives, or who were some of those people you worked with?
Okay, well, I worked with probably the most senior executives, which was the general manager, who I noticed is in one of the documents. He was a wonderful general manager, and he was responsible for the final say of hiring me. His name was Col Williamson, and then he retired. In the short time I was there, he retired, and his general manager behind him was of the same era, Bill McGrath, and Bill was again. These men seem to come from the warehouse wholesale side of the business. They were academically quite good at retailing, but what they didn't have was they didn't have the retailing experience that a modern retailer like Woolworths or Coles would have, where I would call it aggressive retailing, where you live for a week on whatever is advertised, and then behind the scenes, there's 1 year of planning of what's happening in the calendar, and we'll call it even a 26-week calendar, where what is the next promotion, what is the next lot of purchases that are going to be purchased at a very high volume to go into the warehouse, and then advise the stores of what their next promotion was. The cooperative had all of that, had all of those skills, had its warehousing and buying and all that, but it didn't have the population demographics that would be buying the volumes that say Woolworths and Coles and competitors, that we'll call them local competitors. There was also a lot of privateers in Newcastle. Very early days of grocery stores in Newcastle, there was quite a few very good traders. There's the Owens family had a big impact on the smaller supermarket. They were very, very good at trading, buying, selling, and they attracted people to their stores. Also, they tried a warehousing idea where you actually were allowed into the warehouse, price marked your own goods, and took them through a checkout. And the glam side of it was you're in actually a warehouse, as a storeroom with steel shelves and so forth. And that gave the air of value for money, cheap. The trolleys were probably very old. So the amenity inside those stores wasn't glamorous, but you were looking for to feed a family, and you could probably save a few dollars. So it gave that impression to it. I have got the pleasure of knowing Richard Owens, who's again an old boy from the school I went to, but he's a few years over my senior, and again very talented. Knows the retailing game. The cooperative had people like that. There's another gentleman whose name comes to mind. He was my immediate superior in the sense that he was the go-to guy for me. Was Jack Gunn, and Jack had mastered CWS wholesalers. Again, ran CWS wholesalers from an academic point of view and an administration point of view, and then he had people who, to me, were funny. The names they call superior people, as in they didn't call them managers; they call them superintendents. Now that comes from their industrial relationships. To call someone a superintendent means they're pretty high up in the managerial tree, and they bark at the people below them. My time with any of the superintendents was that when I'd put them under sort of a heavy questioning, the best thing they can do is head back to head office or the warehouse, because again, the co-op empowered people to believe that they had a job for life. When I was talking to the minister about doing things and bringing modernisation and looking at the sad fact that the bakery wasn't doing too well, he lectured me seriously about the fact that they were a universal provenance, meaning that if it's out there to be sold, we have the right to buy it and sell it, and if you need it, we'll get it. If for example, you had something on your mind that you wanted to buy, and it was in their power to find it from a supplier, and it was profitable for them to be able to supply it to you, they would negotiate a price, and more often than not, be bought at a good price. But you might have to, like you do today, you don't sometimes get immediate delivery on special items, so the co-op would get those special items. So they had that sort of power. Universal providore. What did it really mean? Well, in a town that also depended on supplying ships, a lot of the ships that came to Newcastle through the era that I'm talking about, the early era, the only real place that they could get provisions delivered to the ship would be through the cooperative store, wholesale, and that'd be from sheets through to anything. So they again had that wonderful broad-based business, and I guess time caught up with it. It must have been a financial strain because I didn't even think of it at the time. When you think of the new building that went into Charlestown, we're talking about millions of dollars they would have had to fund out of capital. They didn't go and borrow the money. To my knowledge, that was all spent out of working capital that they had. So therein lies a huge cost. When the local member for Charlestown, whose name was Richard Face, used to come into the store, he would say to me, like, when you guys want to expand, I can get the road closed, because he had the contacts in the the state government, to be able to do things at Charlestown, which are now done, by the way. The other shopping area that's been improved has required that the roads and streets were redesigned. And he had the vision to sort of say to us, you want to expand across the road and bring it and make it, in other words, move head office out to Charlestown. As it's come to pass, as demographics are, and I'm talking about location demographics, Charlestown is probably the centre of Newcastle. There's no such thing in my book as the CBD. The CBD existed in the 50s. When the shopping centres came, the shift was Jesmond was seen by the Woolworths people who worked with the state government on demographics and location. That was seen as being a pivotal point in the growth of Newcastle. And Charlestown, from a Lake Macquarie point of view, because you've got the city of Newcastle and you've got Lake Macquarie, so there's two competing sort of forces there, would show that Charlestown was the next location that was really significant. And those people that designed that massive shopping centre have huge resources to be able to feed into their models. What's the traffic going to be? What's the patronage going to be? And it doesn't take too long after they extended it 12 times to understand that the thinking was right. The thinking for the co-op to actually grow, if its financial model would have been different, if they were able to have the courage to borrow, they probably return on investment would have been able to do that over time. But again, it comes back to like the managerial oomph. There were limitations, and those limitations also extended to me. I came from a trading, retailing background, not from the financial side of the retailing, but at the same time, you've got an obligation and obligation as well commitment to keep the doors open, because it keeps people employed, and your organisation here needs funding and needs to be able to pay wages and costs and the infrastructure that you've got here, which is, as I look at it, I can remember when it was bush. So times change.
So what sort of impact do you think the closure had on not just the staff but the wider community?
I think for the initial period, I think the first thing that I noticed with people that I would talk to would be, am I going to see my money, the money that I've got caught up in the share capital, which might have been $99, or in some case it might have been $10,000, or it might have been $100,000 that they've deposited. That initial thing is, well, they can sell every damn thing and I want my money back, and that's a normal reaction. After that, I think they realised that there were, by then it might have only been about 1,000, might have been less than 1,000 employees, because I was closely associated with the people who were dealing with their own trauma of being left on the sinking ship. The wider community, I think, were just inconvenienced in the sense of saying, oh, I'll go to the store this morning. Oh, hang on, the store's closed. I don't think the person who was probably out there, who was a shopper that shopped at Coles and Woolworths anyway, even blinked. Those that were loyal, and they were loyal, a lot of loyal people, as I said, they probably, their purchase volumes were small anyway, and they probably just had to find another place to shop. Now, their personal impact, in my own family, and I've got quite a large family, cousins and relatives and so forth, I don't think it meant much to, seriously, there was no tragedy, but I was also, in later life, involved in advising people who were going to be made redundant at the BHP. I think by the time you really got around to the last of the people at the BHP, going from, say, 11,000 people that worked on a shift to just to keep the doors open and keep the lights on, they still needed about 1,500 people, as I recall. I know she was a client of mine, and her husband was a client, Dr. Sandra Eyston, who had a lot to do with the setting up training courses for BHP employees. And her comment was that, have a guess at how many people have got serious academic qualifications. The answer to that was more than you'd even guess, because there are people with trades, and I'm talking about diploma qualifications. So we had people who were trained at a high level. BHP invested, like Woolworths did, invested a lot of money into training and developing their employees. A former BHP general manager, who was a client of mine, made that comment to me. He says, you're going to be dealing with a lot of people like engineers. Australia's got a shortage of engineers. The problem is they all love living in Newcastle. So it might mean that those people that don't have a job locally may have to think big, and they did. A lot of them went off into mining and moved around. Possibly secretarial support staff in the co-op that worked, say, in the accounting and so forth. They would have been. They're not shop assistants. They're working in administration. I think they were absorbed into administration somewhere else. I can't remember bumping into someone that said, when the co-op closed, I was out of work for a long time. Philip Carnell. Philip was in the menswear department, and a very funny man, and a great sense of humour. He went off into being made a D at a very high level in Newcastle in the restaurant field. There would be very few businessmen who wouldn't know him because of his gregarious gregarious nature and happy thing, and he became an expert rather than menswear in putting it out there from the point of view of being a good native and people. I actually was responsible for getting a few of the people in the buying department, the buyers, a start in their own business, suggesting to them they become agents, like what's called a manufacturer's agent, because they had developed those skills and contacts, and they became knights of the road. So community-wise, the education, training and experience that people got at the co-op did skill them up, not necessarily academically, but we were talking about it earlier, how important it is to be able to A, get a job, and B, hold a job. And I think people who were motivated in that area were absorbed into the general, because we're talking about Newcastle's population was expanding, our housing, our suburbs, our shops. So it wasn't like a demise in the sense of we were going into a mining area where the mines had no longer operated, or the sands of the desert had started to creep in and close us off, or the pollution or whatever. You look at the BHP site today, and I'm fortunate to have a view of the old site looking out to the ocean. At different times, it would be polluted. Today, it's not.
So we mentioned earlier that the store building in Newcastle West has been demolished. So you think like the legacy, as you've described, is really with the people. Like, what's your views on the actual building itself?
Other than the facade and the memory that I've got as a child as well as a young adult of going in there and looking at the windows and the window displays, and to think that because I got the pleasure of knowing some of the people who did that work, and they were skilled, and all of those models and things that you used to see. And I lived in London, so I have a memory that stretches back to that. That was as good as anything I saw in Regent Street or Oxford Street, or some of the Selfridges department stores, or I lived very close to a major department store, Wiley's. The co-op store's windows at Christmas time and special event times were as good as anywhere in the world. They were really something. Now, if you stood back on the other side of the street across where the museum became, which was a brewery, and you looked at the building, it really was tired. It was tired and needed something done. If you walked on the floor, as I did, and tramped all over the floor during my time of my responsibility to look after the place, the floor was creaky. It waved because the building was getting tired and old. It really needed to be refurbished, and at a cost that the co-op store would not have been able to fund. If you took one thing from it, was it did have to me, a reasonably nice facade. And I've seen in Glasgow, because I've got relatives in Glasgow and I've been able to travel, what they've done with the preservation of facades. Get great photographs, good architects, good engineers, and they can almost lift the facade off. They can remodel them, and they've done that in part down at the Newcastle Baths, where I lived for 14 years. And you can get a bit of an idea that that's an important part of the heritage. Now, the developer would have good photographs, and if they wanted to, creativity, they could do that. But does it really matter? The heart of the co-op store, unfortunately, is a passing parade of its people. There were some people who I had the impression may need a bit of a G-up in Woolworths terms, but when you actually got to know the people. They were very skilled, they were talented, they got quietly on their way to serve the community. Their hopes and ideals were a little bit more centred on customer service. Never really thought too much about the profitability side of it. Yes, there were things like wastage, which is something that a modern retail wholesale manager is, taught to police pretty hard. So there were things that I implemented through using tools that I'd learned to use that minimise that risk, maximise the opportunity for people to get a job and to hold their job. And I know that the day I left, and the person who replaced me, Bruce Maxwell, he didn't go in there with the view that the co-op store was going to close. He went in there with the view that the co-op store was a living, breathing entity that needed to modernise itself and to try and change its demography to get the younger person to shop in there. Their decision to reduce the dividend to a much lower amount caused more problems with the loyal customer than it did with attracting the new customer. Because by and large, my view is, and I'm driven the same way, I have certain people that I contact for white goods, might be Harvey Norman's, now JB Hi-Fi, and I'm an investor in some of these organisations, so I'm aware that if I am loyal to myself, my share price might go up. That's not too different to the cooperative idea and paying you loyalty bonuses, which again comes back to the cooperative thing.
It does.
So I'm sort of saying to you that by the time the closure came, I think that those that were left from an employee point of view, that would have been devastating because their superannuation fund had very few people who were entitled to what was called a defined benefit. So there was a lot of people who just had accumulation of their lump sum, which meant that they would have had to start again. And if you were, say, 50-year-old or 55-year-old and you've got to try and find a job, that would have been probably difficult, and particularly if you're paying off a home loan and so forth. And I'm very aware and cognizant of that's the reason why you need good management and you need skilled management in all forms of businesses to keep the whole thing rolling.
And you're saying how Maxwell came in after you and was because it seemed the demise was really sort of driven by the changing demographics and what people wanted. And you said he was trying to focus on getting in a younger demographic to the store during those sort of last years. I was just wondering how he did, what sort of tactics he sort of used.
Tactics were pretty simple, and it happens in all fiefdoms, right? Maxwell surrounded himself with people who were not going to sabotage him. How did we do that? He and I concocted an idea that I would go and find out who was unhappy working for Woolworths, or their career had gone a bit off the rails and they wanted a new start. And some of them had left and worked for a company called Best and Less, which is still around. So they were skilled, they had knowledge, they had product knowledge, they had staff training knowledge, and he recruited, I'm going to say, about 10 people. I had, when I was at Charlestown, probably 5 people who were my right and left hand. You cannot hope to control or look after even 100 people. It's impossible. You just can't do it. Or you'll become, you're going to have people knocking on your door when you're trying to have a cup of tea and, can I do this? Because they're asking you permission to do things. So Maxwell, who was a trained manager, who worked in the department store for the Wins Group, was looking for a job. And I got a phone call from him. He says, I believe you're going to throw your hand in and you're going to say, can you do me a favour? And I said, tell me. He said, I need a job. I said, you got it. I mean, you didn't have to paint the picture. He said, I would like your job because the next job will be possibly general manager of the cooperative. And he was a friendly face to the cooperative, to the board. And I put a recommendation in that whilst I was leaving, I found a replacement. Here's the name. Maxwell needed a job, so he was driven. He saw an opportunity that he knew that the co-op was needing guidance. And then the next step was, because he's got the power, if you've got power and you're the GM-elect, you say, I'll take the job on condition that, and that's what he did, condition that I hire a team because the team's not in here. Yeah, I said that earlier. So his master stroke was securing the job. The next bit was harder, was to convince the board that they had to spend some money on wages, but they've also got to perform. So he put them into jobs where they would be effective, and it was better to have people who all knew the song, knew how to row the boat, and you didn't have to train them because Maxwell was a senior manager at Woolworths way back. That's where I met him. And whilst he had some strong professional skills, there was also a funny side to him. He had a very good sense of humour. The co-op store was a vision, simplistic in its beginnings. That in the scheme of things, the Newcastle and District Cooperative and all of the branches that it ran meant for a time it was on the peak of the highest mountain in cooperatives in the world.
We sincerely thank you for coming in and talking about the store. It's really appreciated.